Hi, welcome back to the channel. Narcissists' tantrums can be something that are very difficult to deal with. We don't really expect tantrums from fully grown adults. It doesn't seem to make sense, and they weaponize these tantrums in order to manipulate us, to make us do whatever they want. I'd like to run you through a few diagrams and a few ideas to help you take a step back, be less affected by the tantrums, find ways to operate better in order to remove yourself from the unpleasant situations. I think this is much easier when we understand what is really going on. And from what I've seen, when people are confused and they can't make sense of the situation, there's a higher likelihood that they will keep themselves in these unpleasant and toxic situations because they might be feeling some level of guilt or responsibility over something. And in this case, that's being weaponized by unhealthy, toxic people. If you're ready, let's jump in. So tantrums are typically associated with toddlers, and we expect people over the age of 4 to 6 to grow out of that phase and simply understand that it's not an acceptable way of behaving. So when adults behave that way, it can be quite perplexing. So let's understand how this works. Let's say you are the person in blue and the toxic person is the person in red. The person in blue does something, acts a certain way, and that action is met with a reaction of tantrum. Now, if this reaction came from a stranger on the street, you'd probably just shrug your shoulders and walk away and think this person is mentally unstable. Let's imagine you're wearing a yellow jacket and you walk down the street and somebody has a fit because you're wearing a yellow jacket. You look at this person and think, there's some kind of problem with you, go and see a doctor. I don't care what you think. Clearly, you're mentally unstable. When it comes to someone who's close to us, the situation changes a bit. I'd like to look into why this is. If we understand why it is, it's easier for us to break away. Like I said in other videos, we sometimes have a tendency of believing that other people know something that we don't, and that any form of outrage corresponds to some form of offense. And it's a linear line. The more offended the person is, the more outraged they are. If you haven't seen the video, I suggest you watch it. It's the one about walking on eggshells around narcissists. Strangely, this occurs when we know the person a bit, and if it's a complete stranger, we are more likely just to shrug our shoulders and walk away. This is one of the biases that narcissists use against us. Now, what can be really confusing in this situation is that we don't understand why they behave this way. We can assume that there's a huge offense that we committed, but we see in reality it doesn't seem to correspond. And we think, given what our common goals are, why would the person act this way unless we did something terrible to provoke them? And here I'd like you to do the exercise and write down, what are your goals? Maybe you want to have a respectful relationship, so have respect. Maybe you want to have a healthy relationship. But maybe also you want to avoid conflict, because maybe you consider that conflict is unhealthy, and so if there's any form of conflict, you're better off adapting something to avoid it. As we know, some goals can be contradictory, and sometimes we have to choose. We can't get everything we want, but it's important to understand what we want, to understand what it is we are sacrificing. And when you have your list of goals, you can decide what is your prime goal, or you can decide which goal are you the most afraid of losing. Are you more afraid of losing your respect for yourself, for example? Are you more afraid of losing the avoidance of conflict and therefore having to navigate conflict? I don't know what the answer is. I let you ask and answer the question. So in this situation, let's assume that we want respect and a healthier relationship and avoidance of conflict. And what happens is we say something, and what do we get? We get a tantrum. The response is a tantrum. The tantrum is creating conflict. So we start reinforcing, if I do one thing, I act here in a blue way, I get the tantrum. So if I don't want a tantrum, I have to change my behavior, because if I do the same thing again, I'll get a tantrum again, and I don't want a tantrum. So I change my behavior, and what happens? Now I act in a different way, a yellow way, and I see what reaction I'm getting. Am I getting a tantrum again? Or this time is everything peaceful? Let's assume that, well, if I get a tantrum again, then I'll be changing the behavior to a different color. Now let's assume that I get what I want. In other words, I want peace, I don't want a tantrum, and I get some kind of positive reinforcement that I'll draw in green. This teaches me that if I act in a blue way, I get a red reaction. I act a certain way, I get a tantrum. If I act in a yellow way, I get a positive reaction. Therefore, I will continue acting in a way that helps me avoid the tantrum, because avoiding the tantrum might be my main goal. This means, of course, that I have to give up the blue behavior. And maybe that blue behavior was respect. So maybe I need to give up the respect in order to continue avoiding the conflict. And maybe, let's take this one step further, maybe also I feel that I'm not willing to give up the relationship and I don't want conflict. So I'm willing to give up the other elements because I'm not willing to give up the relationship. That means that the person has power over me because I'm not willing to walk away. So far we've been shining the spotlight on our side. We've seen things from our point of view. I'd like to shift the spotlight and see things from the other person's point of view, and let's see if we can make sense of it. Because quite often we think, I don't understand why they behave that way, but it must be because of me. So now we have the toxic person, and we ask ourselves, what are their goals? And knowing them, they have a few goals that are quite evident. One of them is control, getting their way, getting what they want. Another one might be conflict, or emotional supply, seeing that they are upsetting us, understanding they've got power over our emotions. Maybe also they just enjoy releasing some of the steam, some of the pressure they have. We can just say they enjoy throwing a tantrum, because it looks like they enjoy it. They seem to go out of their way to do it, so maybe let's just assume they enjoy it. And maybe one more is getting attention. So here we go. Maybe a few of the goals of the toxic person. I'm sure the list can go on, and I'm sure that you can complete it yourself and you can add more elements. And if you think of more elements, by the way, do consider sharing in the comments section. I'm sure other people are going to find this really helpful to read. And of course, as always, please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting. It really helps. Thank you very much. So now that we have an overview of some of the goals that the narcissist might have, I'd like to jump back into the first diagram because I think we can make much more sense of it. So to summarize, in this diagram we have a first behavior, the blue behavior, which leads to a tantrum, the red behavior, which we don't want because avoiding tantrums is one of our goals. Therefore, we're willing to give up the blue behavior, do the yellow one, and hope that that one doesn't lead to a tantrum. And if it doesn't lead to a tantrum, then we're happy. So we are willing to give up the blue behavior and do whatever it takes to get the green one. And we put up with the red one as being an acceptable response from an adult human. So far, this is logical. Our primary goal is avoiding the tantrum. Why? I mentioned this in the video about walking on eggshells. Now let's see things from the narcissist point of view. They have multiple primary goals. The first one is that they want the yellow behavior. So if they get it, they're happy. If they don't get it, they get to throw a tantrum. And throwing a tantrum is a perfectly acceptable goal for them. If when they throw a tantrum, we give them the yellow behavior and we sacrifice the blue one, they also get to see us sacrifice something that is important for us, which is the blue behavior. This is a weird one. They're okay with our sacrifice. They enjoy our sacrifice. They enjoy seeing they've got power over us and that we are willing to sacrifice something that is precious for us in order to keep them. And from their point of view, this gives them more value. So here we have a big asymmetry. We have a primary goal, which is avoiding tantrums. Because we're afraid of tantrums, because of whatever psychological reasons. We don't like them, we don't like conflict, we don't like having boundaries, we feel that there's something wrong about it, and therefore we're willing to sacrifice things. On the other hand, we have people who want to make us sacrifice things, want to change our behavior, and enjoy throwing tantrums. Do you see the imbalance in this situation? There's one thing that we want to avoid, and they're happy to go into there, and provided that is our primary goal to avoid the conflict, or maintain the relationship, or avoid losing the relationship, or try to keep it healthy, they have so much power over us, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to maintain that power. So now that we've looked at the dynamics of how it works when narcissists throw tantrums, why they have interest in throwing tantrums, the real question is, what do we do about it, apart from just walking away? Are there any strategies that help us deal with it a bit more effectively? So maybe we can take a step back and avoid getting trapped in these dynamics, avoid getting triggered by these dynamics? That's the topic of the next video. I decided to cut it into 2 parts to make it easier to watch and digest and maybe save for later. So if you'd like to see some suggestions of how it might be possible for you to deal with people who throw tantrums, then click in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.